We go now to Vince Coglianese, Editorial Director at The Daily Caller. Vince, always great to have you on. A lot to unpack here, but first, what's your take on the testimony today from a former business associate of Hunter Biden? Initially, it looked as if the Department of Justice would not allow Devon Archer to testify.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion over why the Department of Justice even sent a letter out on Saturday of all days, basically calling for Devon Archer's imprisonment related to another case that involved Devon Archer. And of course, that comes just before, 48 hours before his testimony today before the House. In Congress, he's doing this behind closed doors testimony. The full transcript expected to come out at some point. And when it does, hopefully it'll give us some revelations and some more information on how Hunter Biden was making money and what he was offering in exchange for that immense amount of cash. We know that Hunter Biden has made millions of dollars by his own admission, thanks to his last name. It's really at this point just a matter of how much access was he providing directly to his father in exchange for all of that cash. And that's where Devon Archer can begin to color in some of the lines for congressional investigators. He's a man who worked closely with Hunter Biden. He was considered at one point his best friend in business, and he knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak. He has, ahead of this testimony, the expectation was that he would detail the phone calls that Joe Biden would join with Hunter Biden's foreign business partners. In other words, Hunter would be sitting with a foreign business partner, and then he would put his father on speakerphone to wow the business partners and to convince them to close the deal. Now, what were the contents of those calls? What did Joe know about the business? And most importantly, did he offer anything that he had access to by being vice president of the United States at the time in exchange for that money? That would be a huge deal. And of course, the subject of all of this congressional inquiry.
Yeah, and as we know, late last week, a plea deal for Hunter Biden in Delaware fell apart at the last minute. I know you've been following the story very closely and say that some parts of that proposed deal, well, they were a little unusual. Tell us why you say that.
Well, they were deeply unusual. I'm not speaking as a lawyer. I'm speaking to a guy who's spoken to a lot of lawyers over the course of the past week, asking them about this, former U.S. attorneys among them. And I said, do you recognize anything in the way that the United States Department of Justice had structured this plea deal? And the answer I have heard throughout is no. We've never seen anything like this. Fundamentally, the Hunter Biden case, as it was presented last week before the court, was a plea deal involving 2 misdemeanor tax charges. Now, that's for millions of dollars in unpaid taxes that would later be paid after the Justice Department was already pursuing him. And it also involved lying on a gun background check form some years ago about his drug use. He claimed he didn't do drugs, but of course, in the book that he wrote, he claimed, of course, he was using drugs extensively at the time. So he lied on that gun background check form. And that was an open and shut case. So the Justice Department goes forward and says, look, we'll do a deal with you. Here's the deal. 2 misdemeanors for the taxes, and we'll make the gun charge essentially go away if you keep your nose clean. They bring this to the court, and the judge threw the brakes on it because she looked at the plea agreement and the attached documentation, and she said, something is not right here. She noticed that the Justice Department was about to give him blanket immunity to all federal crimes related to any of his business dealings in places like China and Ukraine and Romania. And she wants more time now to consider this. That was not what the Justice Department expected. That is not what the Hunter Biden side expected. And the whole thing looks like they were trying to pull a fast one on this judge. Luckily, she didn't allow it. And hopefully for now, the justice system is working as intended.
Vince, we have probably a little more than a minute or so left. I quickly want to talk about this. Also, late last week, President Joe Biden publicly acknowledged his 7th grandchild, a little 4-year-old girl whose father is Hunter Biden. Curious, what do you make of the acknowledgement and the timing? And also, how do you think all of these revelations and stories about Hunter Biden, how do you think they're impacting his father's re-election bid and overall political career, if at all?
I think that the broader media is beginning to talk about this, which was not something that had happened throughout the Biden presidency. All of these allegations about the Biden family business dealings are now becoming much more public. And certainly this revelation that the Bidens have a 7th grandchild, that was well known to anybody who was paying attention to that case out of Arkansas. But for the most part, many of the legacy media hadn't focused on it at all. In fact, the first headlines that they were running were this past weekend, as they said, Joe Biden acknowledges 7th grandchild for the first time. Where was all of your coverage before that? Joe Biden, by and large, wasn't asked about this. I think a lot of people have seen this case and have been deeply troubled by the fact that Biden represents himself as a devout Catholic, as a grandfather, and had refused up until this point to even acknowledge this young girl's existence. It is a step in the right direction, of course, that he is, but it's unfortunate that it appears that it is merely a political gesture because it's happening as the presidential campaign heats up. And it's too bad because there's a 4-year-old girl's life that is at the center of all of this.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Vince, always great to be with you. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you, Tracy.